Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The owners and controllers of global financialized capital are engaging in a zero-sum, go-for-broke, full-throttle, scorched earth power grab. And in that pursuit, they are instrumentalizing the full economic, political, military, and intelligence resources of the American state. This is what's happening right now. We are seeing the dramatic resurgence of U.S. interference, both covert and overt, around the world, particularly in countries that have the potential to achieve economic and political sovereignty in the global south, but not only there, and against any countries that maintain a cooperative relationship with other major powers besides the U.S., like Russia and China. In Europe, as I've talked about many times on my channel, they are trying to cut the continent off from Russia and alienating it from China. They are sabotaging the European economy to make the entire continent dependent and to consolidate the power of the largest already existing, already established, largest private sector powers. Now, tension has already started to be stoked between European countries, and spillover violent conflict is inevitable from the Ukraine war, with the flood of small arms, untraced arms, weaponry that is supposed to be flooding into Ukraine, but who knows where it's going. And all of the nations in Europe are drastically increasing their military spending. So this is violent conflict waiting to happen. Now, just a few weeks ago, there was a bombing in Istanbul, which Turkish authorities suspect was coordinated by, planned by, if not directly carried out by, U.S. intelligence. And of course, the Nord Stream pipeline was bombed, suspected to have been carried out by the UK upon the orders of the US. We had Imran Khan toppled in an American-backed coup in Pakistan. And in country after country, we're seeing protest movements against their governments being orchestrated by, funded by, supported by, organized by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is essentially a wing of the CIA dedicated to regime change. In Belarus, in Thailand, in Hong Kong, in Venezuela, on and on. And this all brings us to Malaysia and the recent general election, which has brought to power Anwar Ibrahim. Now, it's no secret that Anwar Ibrahim worked for the IMF, the World Bank, that he has a relationship with the World Economic Forum, and that he has long been a recipient of funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. This is all publicly known. Now, the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, is explicitly stated to be dedicated to advancing American economic and political interests around the world. And yes, they have been supporting and promoting Anwar Ibrahim for years. Now, if you happen to think that American interests and Malaysian interests are identical, that's up to you. But personally, I'm not aware of any country in the last century that has served American interests without severely damaging their own people. This is one of those rare areas where it's actually helpful to be an old person, because you've actually lived through a considerable amount of history and you remember things and you are able to recognize patterns. Now, there are two major models that the US employs when they are trying to establish a client state. One is the obvious and familiar installation of a military dictator. You can think Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, or before him Pervez Musharraf. But the other model is to groom opposition leaders who present themselves as champions of democracy, but who end up promoting and pursuing neoliberal policies that subjugate their nations to corporate power. Now, some of these people may actually begin as genuine, sincere leaders, but only later on do they sort of sell out and morph into servants of the owners and controllers of global capital. You can think of Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, Aristide in Haiti, or Václav Havel in the Czech Republic. And then you have other opposition leaders who are just manufactured from day one, like Vladimir Zelensky. Anwar Ibrahim clearly fits the groomed opposition leader model to a T, and his credentials as basically an affiliate marketer for neoliberalism, his credentials are pristine. And I'm not even going to talk about the questions around Anwar Ibrahim's moral conduct personally. But suffice it to say, those questions do exist, and they've never really been answered. And yes, Western intelligence prefers to be able to utilize individuals who are, shall we say, morally compromised, because that keeps them loyal. Otherwise, the same system that is promoting them and supporting them and protecting them can flip and immediately destroy them. But only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the truth behind the allegations against Anwar Ibrahim. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. Now, does all of this mean that Anwar Ibrahim will necessarily adhere to that pattern? Will he inevitably implement IMF-style structural adjustment reforms to the economy, take out loans? Will he go along with the plan to use Malaysia's geostrategic location to contain China and bolster U.S. influence in the region? Will he necessarily undermine Malaysia's industrial development on the pretext of fighting climate change, but actually just in order to subsidize Western manufacturers? And will he talk about things like unity and equality while actually deepening the divisions in Malaysia between religious and racial and ethnic communities in order to distract from all of these destructive policies? No, of course not. Anything can happen. There are those rare examples in history of the West backing someone who ultimately develops a conscience and serves the interests of their own nation and not the global 1%. I can't think of any offhand, but I'm sure there's been one or two, and I sincerely pray that Anwar Ibrahim will be one of those. But I'm making this video just so that at least you know what to look for to recognize whether or not Anwar Ibrahim is fitting the mold or breaking the mold, whether he's following the pattern or rejecting it. If, for example, if he increases Malaysia's debt while simultaneously prioritizing balancing the budget, if he suspends Chinese investment projects, particularly any of those that are connected with the Belt and Road Initiative, if he proposes to, say, raise the retirement age, or if he promotes deregulation and privatization and so on, then he's adhering to the mold. Or, for example, if he endorses America's Indo-Pacific framework for prosperity, he's following the pattern. If he starts beating his chest over the South China Sea, he's following the pattern. Again, anything is possible. And I sincerely pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide Anwar Ibrahim at least as long as he retains the position of Prime Minister of Malaysia, because this is a critical moment in Malaysia's history. And the decisions that are made now will determine whether or not Malaysia is sovereign, independent, and safe from neo-colonialist corporate subjugation for decades to come. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.